right, welcome all and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Sarah and I'm one of Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake's Program and Outreach Coordinators. And before we get started, I'd like to go over a brief tech orientation that you'll see here on this slide, just to ensure a pleasant experience for tonight's program. First, we ask that you keep yourself muted during the presentation. Also, if you have to get up and move around, we please ask that you turn off your camera to avoid background distractions. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded. So again, if you don't want your picture shown, please turn your camera off now. And last, please use the chat function as a way to ask for help. Should you need assistance, one of our IPC staff here tonight will do their best to assist you. So next, you'll see a lovely staff photo from our first Faith and Waters Restoration Summit. Some of you in the room may have come to this wonderful event. I'm there in the front row. If you find yourself in any of these regions that I cover and you're looking to connect, please reach out. And next, you'll see our program lineup. As we're going to begin with a land acknowledgement and an opening reflection, followed by some information about our organization for new folks in the room. And then we'll get to meet our panelists for an in-depth discussion tonight regarding a wonderful topic, followed by some Q&A and close with a prayer. So now I would like to take a moment to acknowledge this land and these waters that were stewarded by many who came before. And so please join us in recognition while muted. For today, we hold space and reflection on and gratitude for the land upon which we live and the local waters that support and nourish us all. We recognize that this land and these waters were stewarded by many who came before. We reflect together as people of faith in response to the calling of our hearts to come alongside the original stewards of this land and these waters that sustain us all. We seek to change the narrative of this story, our story, towards one of harmony with the gifts of creation and all living beings. And so we encourage you to learn more by visiting. There's a link that's going to pop in the chat here in the next minute or so. That's going to take you to a map that shares some of the history in the region, and you'll get to learn a little bit more about the original stewards from about 1,000 years ago. So please keep in mind, it's just a snapshot in history when we know there's well more than over 10,000 years of Indigenous history in our region. Thank you. And now I'd just like to open tonight's program with a beautiful Jewish prayer for the renewal of creation. And I found it very appropriate for tonight's topic, and I hope you like it too. Master of the universe, in whose hands is the breath of all life and the soul of every person, grant us the gift of Shabbat, a day of rest from all our labors. With all of our senses, may we perceive the glory of your works. Fill us with your goodness, that we may attest to your great deeds. Strengthen us to become your faithful partners, preserving the world for the sake of future generations. May it be your will, Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, to renew your blessing for the world in our day, as you have done from the beginning of time. Thank you for taking that moment of acknowledgement and sharing that reflection together. And I'd like to shift gears now. And as we move to the next slide, we're just going to take a quick look at some of our sponsors. We just want to express our deep gratitude. They fund our work and make all of this possible. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see where we are and we fit in this puzzle as we act as a connector organization. So for those folks that are new in the room, this just illustrates how we help congregations search for resources to pursue environmental stewardship projects. And if you'd like to learn more or learn about people who are working with us, you can see on the next slide that you're not alone. And so one of the ways you can partner with us is through our One Water partnership. And this is a really cool map that shows you all the congregations that have pledged and started this movement with us. And there actually should be a link to that for people who have not signed our pledge yet. We encourage you to join. And then we also want to mention on our next slide, for any Green team leaders or members that are in the room with us tonight, we just kicked off our June training, and our next one's coming up in September. And we have over 30 congregations with us for this June, so it's just very exciting that there's going to be a lot of new stewards out there helping care for creation. And finally, if we took a look on the next slide, for folks who aren't aware of all the many resources that we have to offer, there's a link, and there's just a lot of great stuff that can help build and strengthen your efforts at your places of worship and home and beyond to your greater community. So let's delve straight into the heart of tonight's discussion now. Our focus for tonight's webinar puts the spotlight on the plastic industry, and we gave you special access to view this film, The Story of Plastic, prior to tonight's discussion with acclaimed filmmaker Deia Schlosberg. If you haven't had the chance to view it yet, no worries. Her team has been very generous and offered us a few more days. So you'll have through the weekend to view the film, and we'll provide that information for those needing it. So without further ado, I want to welcome Deia and offer others an in-depth look into the implications of this film and how we can be part of the solution. So we want to kick tonight's talkback session off with some thoughtful, provoking questions that I'm sure is ready to get everyone engaged here. And I want to welcome Deia before we just jump right in. Just give her a warm welcome, please.
Hello. Thank you so much for being part of this and learning a little bit about the coalition you all are part of and are working on. Is really exciting. It's really cool to do Q&As with groups that are activated and really want to learn more and do more, and it's really inspiring.
Thank you so much. So let's just get right to it. You know, the first question I want to ask, after viewing the film, obviously is, what inspired you to make the story of plastic, and what message did you hope to convey to audiences?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it was different as the process evolved. So the reason that I was first interested in becoming involved was my background was more in, I did more film work and education work related to climate change and fossil fuel extraction. And I know that at the time I knew there was a lot of material out there about plastic pollution as an issue. And of course it concerned me, but I felt like the issue I was more called to work toward was climate and climate justice. And I kind of realized once I was asked to be part of this project that I didn't really see a lot of material that connected those things. It kind of siloed plastic and pollution from climate and the extractive resource, industry. And I felt like that was an important connection point that needed to be made. And I hadn't seen that explicitly communicated in a film yet. So I got pretty excited about showing that link and the importance of tying those things together and kind of bridging the gap in these different efforts. And then later, as the project progressed and I dove further in, the team dove further in, and we started to learn more, I realized that the story that we were telling went even beyond that to, like, what is the narrative around plastics? What is the narrative that we've been told? Who controls that narrative, and why is that our understanding? Why have these things been siloed? And that became the most compelling thing for me to dive into. And so the shape of the film kind of changed at that point to asking those questions. And of course, they tied together.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because, I think, again, you just mentioned how compartmentalized all these pieces are. And so you've just woven a very clear picture and put all those pieces together. And so, I think that message is clearly conveyed to audiences, at least, my opinion. So,
Thanks.
yeah, the story of plastic, You know, I would definitely describe it as a call to action film. And I'm just curious as to what specific actions or changes do you hope viewers will take or advocate for after watching the film?
So a- again, there's definitely a range, and I think I hope that it's personal. Like I hope that people take the message that they most feel like they can run with. So um what I was really compelled to learn about through this process was um the questioning the prevailing narratives, and I hope that that is something people can take away, like take pausing and kind of questioning why we believe what we believe and who controls that messaging. Why do we have the understandings that we have? um and then collectively, as far as action that can be taken, um there are uh, endless opportunities, but some concrete things are t- getting involved with legislation, particularly around extraction, um, and extended producer responsibility, circular economy models at various scales, including very local initiatives up to county, state, national, global. Um, but yeah, what I think is really important for people to take away in the end is that this is a super complex problem with countless moving parts, and that also means there are myriad opportunities to plug in and do what you do best and do what you are most passionate about, somewhere in this system, and affect change where you're at and using what tools you have and what access you have.
I really love that. The whole meeting people where they're at, right? Because the problem, as you mentioned, seems so overwhelming and like encompassing. So I think people do have a tendency to not do anything sometimes when it's that overwhelming. So really just kind of focusing on those little small actions that you know you can take. Um, I think that's a great way. And just one last plug for the extended producer responsibility. I love that you highlighted that. That to me in the film seemed like a no-brainer. And that is something I would love to see more people get behind, push, and just tell our legislators like we want this, and we need it. So yeah. All right, well, moving on. Um, One of the powerful themes in the documentary is the disproportionate impact of plastic pollution on vulnerable communities, right? Both domestically and globally. So I am curious, if you have any thoughts on how we can ensure that environmental justice is prioritized in those efforts to address plastic pollution.
Absolutely. So I think the production of the film, we kind of tried to model how I think we as a team and movement wanted to see change happen, and that is by making sure that the parties that are most affected are at the table making the decisions, involved in or leading the writing of legislation, making sure that the people who know the most from lived experience are um the ones steering the um the court the ship, like to write the course. um and I think part of that is um like as part of legislation, I think we need to build in reparations um to the fines and the permits that the um offending parties, polluting companies, uh end up paying in to the system that they've created.
I really am interested in that. And I hope you don't mind me pausing there for a second. Do you mind just explaining a little bit more for folks that might not be as familiar with that process of like reparations, like how that could actually work in, legislation against these organizations?
Sure. Um, so it's so legislation, I mean, it's really tricky because you can impose regulations, and that's great, but there's also like the whole enforcement component, and that's trickier. That said, in an ideal system, re reinforcement can look like fining the companies, the parties doing the extraction, um, and thinking about what, like where that money goes, that it should go proportionally to those who those violations most affect. So I mean, there are a lot of frontline communities that we spotlight in the film, and say Procter and Gamble violates some permit that they didn't get, like their fines should go to the people who ended up having their water polluted because they violated that regulation. So it gets tricky and complicated to enforce, but I think writing that in from the get-go, at the very least, connects those dots.
Yeah, right. And it's almost, please correct me if I'm wrong in assuming this from your knowledge and that great answer. It's almost like a fail safe, right? Because like if it's not there, like you said, already written in, then how are they going to enforce that? And then going back to that seems almost insurmountable.
Yeah.
So that makes so much sense to be more proactive at the beginning. And look, all of these organizations and companies can foot that bill. So
Yeah.
um, last question, sorry, because this is such a great response. In your opinion, do you think grassroots movements behind that type of legislation has some sway and would definitely help that endeavor?
I think they're the only thing that can make that happen because, right, I mean, the companies that through ALEC write legislation certainly aren't going to include those things in the policies. So it absolutely takes grassroots movements and organizations that keep track of bills that are up, to nudge citizens into lobbying and writing their representatives, and all of those pieces to make sure that
they're protected up front, right? Sorry,
yeah.
I hope you don't mind me just jumping in, but no, that it actually is inspiring, right? Like you saying that's one of these pieces that I get from how we all can be inspired at the end of the film, right? Like how to tackle it, and that's a great thing that we can help.
Yeah, yeah. I was hesitating to say lobbying because it's had such a
Oh.
can have such negative connotation, but I've been doing some lobbying with Judith Enck's organization, and just some great bills that are coming up I'm based in New York, and they have like um the where is it? Anyway, it's like a better bottle bill, like new
Oh yes. Okay, I'm familiar with
bits.
that, and there's a lot of success with that. So
Yeah.
yeah, thanks
Um,
for. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, so there's a lot of um initiatives in motion, and there are organizations tracking those initiatives. So any given individual on this call or doesn't have to, like, you don't have to be tracking everything. Just like find out who's tracking those bills in your area, and jump in when they need like citizen voices. Like just to reemphasize that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like people are doing this, these things are in motion. And it's just figuring out like the best place you can plug in with the resources you have.
Thanks for that reminder. I do think folks need to hear that message multiple times, right? It's like that secret rule of seven, the same information, 7 different times, 7 different ways. So as often as we can remind people, I think that's important. So sorry to get off on a tangent. I don't want to divert too much. There's another, real important question I wanted to ask about highlights of the film. You really did such an amazing job of kind of illustrating and painting a very clear picture for people of the failures of the recycling as a solution. And I still hear that people, you mentioned, bought into this narrative. So, in terms of alternative approaches or strategies, do you see anyone as being more effective, to your knowledge, in addressing the issue when it comes to solving plastic pollution?
Um, well, I think alternative distribution models is a huge one. Going back to reusables, encouraging reusables, um, collecting like bottle bills are extremely effective. And like recycling wasn't created as a system to deal with the majority of the plastic that now exists in the world. Like our system of recycling predates the existence of these lower value plastics that are now created. And it's still a great system for what it was created for. I mean, it's a super effective for paper and metals and like high value plastics. Still not as great as recollecting and reusables, but like it's fairly effective. It just breaks down with the lower value majority of plastics now and a lot of the single-use stuff now. But yeah, also regulations there about which materials are allowed to be considered recyclable. Like Martin in the film mentions like just because they stick the recycle arrows on something and force local municipalities to collect it doesn't mean it can actually be recycled. And that happened at the urging of the companies who know that if people see that symbol, they're going to think, oh, it's fine, we can recycle it. And that's not the case.
Yeah, I'm so appreciative of you mentioning that, right? So it's like it's not like the whole system is broken, but for this particular crisis that we're in, we have to adapt to the changes that have happened since it's like inception. And as you mentioned, it's just kind of like degraded over time. And I'll be frank, I'm kind of concerned about, I'm not sure if anyone else has caught a lot of the commercials, but like Pepsi, I feel like in an attempt to romanticize the idea of recycling again, right? It's like, oh, we're made to go back, and they showed this circular, but once you see that 4 or 5, you, like you said, they're hauling it away, but it's not really going back into anything meaningful. And I think that's something that really needs to we need to help educate folks on. So thanks for like breaking that down and clarifying that.
Sure.
As a filmmaker, just jumping right into the next
Yeah.
question, I really am curious to know, how do you balance the need to convey urgency and severity of this plastic pollution crisis with the importance of the inspiring hope and empowerment among viewers?
Um, that's a very complicated question. That I think the answer to that is very much on a case-by-case basis. Mostly look, it's mostly like what the intended use is of the film. Whether the film is intended to educate or the film's intention is to change a specific policy, or to entertain and just plant a small seed in a broader audience. So you kind of have to work backwards from what your intention is. For this film, the intention was always to use it as a tool for the Break Free from Plastic movement. And that meant making sure it connected the dots, because that's what the movement's goal is. The movement is people, organizations in all different companies all over the world looking at and working on different facets of this problem, like incinerators and like working with the rights of waste pickers in different communities, and frontline communities and areas of extraction. And so like all these organizations that are dealing with different parts of the problem wanted to be able to show how their work intersected with all these other efforts. And so this film can connect those dots, and they can use it both to educate their communities and show how their context is part of a larger whole. So we, in wanting to make this a tool for education, we built curriculum around it, worked with different educational organizations to do that. We got it distributed broadcast wise by Discovery, so it's seen by a huge global audience, but also carved out rights for community screenings like this, so that it could be used for discussion and in small groups to apply to local initiatives, and yeah, just really make it as a tool for action.
That really makes a lot of sense, saying it's a case by case, because I think sometimes where we're at, we have a tendency to think we're in a bubble, right? And so, yeah, what would work for us is not necessarily going to work for someone else halfway across the world. So, yeah, and I did love that. I mean, I loved how towards the end of the film there were all these different like case studies, and people, like you said, they saw, identified the problem, and then came to their own decision as how they were going to solve it. So yeah, I'm coming to the last question already. It's kind of crazy that almost half an hour's just kind of flown by. But I did want to talk about, how your documentary emphasizes the importance of individual and collective action, right, in addressing this issue. Are there any other possible practical steps or initiatives that communities, businesses, even governments could implement based on your knowledge and experience that you see could be an easy and effective way to reduce plastic waste and transition to this more sustainable future that we're all longing for?
Well, it's interesting. I think the part of it starts with the framing of that question. The question that is asked most often is, how do we reduce plastic waste and plastic pollution? And I think the best way to do that is to ask a different question, which is, how do we, or what can we do to get rid of plastic that isn't necessary? And I mean, the way to best get rid of plastic pollution is to stop the production of plastic, especially single-use plastic. And that is all about the front of the process, restricting extraction, restricting development, restricting build outs of petrochemical facilities. Because I don't know the percentage, but a very large percentage of new fossil fuel and petrochemical development is for the creation of single-use plastic and low-value plastics. So I think more than, like, this is the bathtub metaphor animation in the film. You can you can try to empty it out with a teaspoon, but if the tap is still flowing, the tub's going to keep spilling over. So we need to figure out what we can do to turn off the tap first. And all action is important. And everything we can do to address the problem is important. But I think the greatest in terms of like bang for your buck, with your personal time and resources and emotional energy and everything, is to focus our energies on the front side of that process, that front end, and turn off the tap.
Yeah, I agree. And look, we've seen states and counties take these initiatives on, right? Like I'm thankful, even though my county was late in the game, they started January 1st with ban the bag, like, you know, no more plastic bags. And it was inspiring to see how quickly all that side street trash just cleared up. So, you know, we don't need this. And I'm just so grateful that you're reiterating this message that we don't need it. We can tell them we don't want it, and just, you know, find better ways to just go about our everyday life without it. So I'm so grateful for your time and knowledge, Deia. It's the passion so readily shows through your art. So um, you know, I don't want to take up too much time. I know we're going to have a few more minutes at the end for the Q&A to open up for the floor. And I know there's a lot of folks that are going to have some questions for you. So if you can just hang tight. But I did want to introduce someone to us that's a great partner with IPC, and they're doing some of this work to help address this issue. Linda Coyle is the Green Team leader over at the Evangelical Reformed United Church of Christ. And she's just going to share some of the things that her and her team are doing to, again, address some of these issues and just kind of being examples of good stewards. So please welcome Linda, and thank you so much for coming tonight and sharing what you're doing.
Hey, well, thank you. First of all, I want to say we started back in 2019. That's when our Green Team formed. But before that, I was invited to a Multi-Faith Alliance of Climate Stewards, a Frederick County meeting, which I knew nothing about. And I went to it and sort of got drawn in. And one of the challenges was, well, form a green team in your church. Well, without the support of these people from other churches, and that team was also being supported by IPC and IPL, I got the courage to go ahead and step out and form the green team and gather a group of people who wanted to make some changes. So I just think that's important, that people know there are other groups that can help you and help you get started. But when we first started, ironically, our first thing was plastics. So we did sort of show and tells of like how you can reduce your plastic. What can you use instead of this plastic container? What can you use instead of this shampoo bottle? So we had just some little show and tells after church, and we started a campaign of using reusable water bottles and bags. And the way we sort of got more people on board by taking pictures of people using them and posting, like, look who's using their reusable water bottle or whatever, you know, like that. Just so it was not a don't do that, but yay, you're doing this great thing. So that was our initial start into our green team life. That same summer, we had a number of forums, and we invited Key Compost, who was a new composting group in Frederick County, to come and tell us, you know, share what they were doing. And we got very excited about it. So we went to our consistory, which is our governing body, to get permission to do composting, which was going to be a cost. And so they agreed that we could do that if we could fund it for a year. And so we got sponsors to fund a month of recycling, and we ended up getting more than a year's worth of sponsors. And so by October, we had put October 2019, we had gotten our composting program started. And when you first start something like that, you need to have buy-in from the congregation. So we had kids who had been recycling or composting in their schools be guides. So they would be there saying, yes, you can put your napkins in here, and yes, all the food goes in here. Because with Key Compost, you could put everything in there, all food. So meat, cheese, whipped cream, anything, it could all go in. So that made it really easy. But the thing we had going for us too is that we have a commercial kitchen. So we had a dishwasher. So we switched from using plastics and styrofoam and all that kind of stuff and started washing dishes each Sunday. And that worked. It was going well. And then COVID hit. Boom, everything shut down. We had to stop, nobody was coming to, we still, by July, we were having services, but it was very limited, and we had to stop our composting service for quite a while. Gradually, everybody came back and started getting back up to speed, but nobody wanted to handle any dishes or anything like that. So everything was single serving, put out, like granola bars and chips, and none of that was recyclable or compostable. The food was compostable, but the other stuff wasn't. So that was like, we were doing so well, and now we're set back. But gradually things have come around, and we're back to much more robust composting, and we're trying to reduce the amount of single serving offerings that we have, and using either large bags or homemade goods, because every week after church we have a fellowship that's like a huge thing. So it's a regular deal. And then the Green Team did get a grant of $500 because we're doing the air quality monitoring program with the University of Maryland. And so we donated that to buying compostables for whenever we have an outside event or something that we can't wash dishes, that sort of thing. So I've been really proud. We switched our communion cups to glass, and we washed those. We had a retirement ceremony for our pastor last year, and the whole church agreed that we would use regular wine glasses instead of disposable ones, and it was going to be a huge event. So it was a big step that the congregation agreed to step up to do that. But it's still challenges everywhere you look. Every place you look, there's plastic. But I really, our Green Team has also been involved in a lot of advocacy things with IPC and IPL. And I know there was a extended producer bill in the legislation last year, and it maybe wasn't a priority, but it's one that will probably come back again. So we would be up for doing advocacy for something like that. There's so many other things I could talk about, but that's sort of been our story. Oh, I will say, we got to the point where it was hard to get enough people to wash the dishes. So finally, we developed this system where we have 8 teams of about 6 people, 6, 7 people, and they only have to do it once every 8 weeks. So it's not the same people all the time, and we're pulling in lots of new people to, when this is a big commitment, it's only once every 8 weeks, more people are willing to volunteer for it. So that's where we are right now.
Linda, I am so grateful for the plethora of great ideas, and also acknowledging the challenges, right? I think when COVID hit, I mean, I'll be honest, like I'm still reeling from losing 2 years. Like I'm looking at my son, like, how are you 4 already? I'm still looking at him as like a baby, so I get that. And I know a lot of folks struggled during that time period. So it's very inspiring to hear you say, like, look, we had a little setback, but now we're back to where we were prior. And also, what a great suggestion of something I hear quite often from many congregations about the dishes, right? Like, and it's such a great and easy switch to just say, we're going to just wash, because it is such a wasteful, especially every week, sometimes multiple times a week and multiple services. I think folks don't realize how much trash accumulates. So, anyway, without getting too long-winded, I think that's like such a great idea, because like you said, once every 2 months, how can you say no? You come every week and share fellowship, right? Like that's a really easy lift, I think. And I'm hoping, and I'm sure that other folks are encouraged to do that at their congregation too. So I'm confident many folks in the room are inspired to take on one, if not a few of those actions. And I hope you don't mind if folks reach out to you, if they have any questions about some of those projects you've shared with us this evening.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to jump in?
No.
Okay. We're about to open up the floor for Q&A for our audience. And I've seen quite a few questions come through that were really good. However, I would like to pose one last question to both of our invaluable, amazing keynote speakers this evening. After watching the film, I thought about the complexity, and Deia, you again illustrated that so eloquently to us. Since it's such a multifaceted issue, intertwined with really broad environmental and social challenges, what's your thought or view on this fight against plastic pollution, and how they kind of intersect with other movements like climate action, you mentioned that earlier, and social justice? And so I'm interested to hear from either of you, your thoughts on that.
Oh. All right, I'll start. So we are, I think, blessed with the congregation we have that is willing to do some, that we have some resources to do it, but to be able to advocate for others, step up when there is legislation proposed that we can, lobby for or advocate for, write letters to the editor. Those are all things we can do. And helping educate our congregations about alternatives to plastic. It's hard for all of us to come up with, how do I do this without plastic, but to the extent that we can share some of our tips or ideas, because I do believe, we have to turn off the tap, but sometimes turning the tap will turn off when there isn't a demand. And so that's a hard lift, but trying to reduce the demand is also part of the puzzle. That's all.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I know advocacy has got, again, Deia, you mentioned that's like, really one of the main issues we got to get behind if we want to make this change. But yeah, please share your thoughts on how they intersect and your thoughts on that.
There, it's hard to, I wish I could share. I've got a diagram of all the different kind of topics and intersections of all the different issues involved. But yeah, ultimately the plastics issue is the same, like it's like the same extractive capitalistic systems. Like there's always the system we exist in, like finds the places that are easiest to exploit. So that means like communities with the least resources, and so I think like being aware of how we can help, and Linda, I think you touched on this, like how we can see those vulnerabilities that the system kind of is drawn toward exploiting, and shore them up, like as communities. For example, if I'm thinking of of a community in Houston that we filmed in right next to the Valero plant. And the community predated the plant by generations. But the plant was able to move in there because the people that lived in that community didn't have the resources to fight back. So I think having an awareness of how these things happen, so we best know where to turn our resources, or like which communities might need the communities around them to shore them up, and realize like it's going to benefit all of us if we all, have this common fight and this common vision of like a stronger community.
Do you mind me asking where would we point folks to those type of groups, as you mentioned? Because like it is hard keeping track of all that information. So if there are folks doing it, is that something that you might have that you could share with us either now or after the recording? Because we will be sharing all this information with folks, right? So yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. The Break Free from Plastic movement page has links to all of the partner organizations, and they're, I believe, searchable by region. So you can plug into like Maryland organizations and see what they're working on, where they're working, if you want to plug into something locally, or if it's more of a topic based thing, if you're in a particular field, you can find organizations there where you can plug in your resources and abilities in a more like virtual distributed community.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And that, it's helpful to know that like there's this one-stop shop for that. So yeah, we encourage folks to go there. Again, there's folks from all over our area, DC, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, sometimes even from New York. There's a lot of tributaries that come down to the Bay. So we encourage folks to go to that website. And I'm so grateful for your thoughts on that and pulling all these points together. I want to open up the floor to our audience and just give one more thanks, because Deia, you were on the chat. I was actually looking at some of the questions, and they pretty much, a lot of them have been answered already. So you're just wonderful. But I want to highlight one verbally, if I may, because this is a great one. And I think we could just touch on it one more time for folks that might have missed this. Linda was wondering, back when we didn't know plastic existed, how were they packaged versus now? And your answer was spot on. Again, I think that's a disconnect that a lot of us including myself, was educated once watching your film that all this plastic that's creating the crisis, this is new stuff. This isn't from even that time. So I think it's helpful, and we have to remind folks again, like your film illustrates, that there's these plans to make all these, there's no plans for them to slow down the production. So that's only just heightening our urgency to address it. Yeah, I'm so happy that, you know, you reiterated that point, that most of this plastic's just been produced in the past couple of years. Again, we're coming, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I do have one more comment. Like I did say that I think the most effective place to make change is the turning off the tap, but I also believe absolutely that every effort made toward solutions is not just about that one effort, but it is, that effort isn't in itself a way to have the conversation and to increase awareness and plant seeds. And so, like we say in the film about cleanup efforts, it's not about cleaning up the plastic on that beach on that day. That's a drop in the bucket, but cleaning up that plastic is an opportunity to see how much there really is, and to then talk about that and think about, you know, the rest of the picture. So everything matters.
Thank you. Right. Like, yeah, everything has its place. They all tie in, and you're right. It is when you experience it. I mean, I've done cleanups myself, and I'm always astounded. Especially if I'm in a park close by the bay. I won't name any in particular, but it's right before you go down to the Eastern Shore, and it like brings me to tears when I see trash receptacles, and then there's just still trash though. It's like there was even a place for you to put it. So for me, that, like, you know, the disconnect, there's so many opportunities to help try to change that behavior. And I've always tried to model that. I have 2 small kids, so, you know, they pick up and see me, and they see my habits. And so when we do that, it's just an opportunity to teach and show a better way. Again, I can't believe we're almost at the top of the hour. I want
just one last question that I saw here from Bonnie Thompson, and I think this is mostly for you, Deia. She was asking, you know, the film did a great job of painting the whole picture of this terrible problem. And, you know, she's wondering, have you seen any changes between the release of the film and now, especially in the area of fossil fuel companies taking responsibility?
I wish I had a more concrete answer on that. I have seen a lot more discussion of the problem and the connections, and I have seen more campaigns on the part of industry to talk about solutions. I don't know how much those campaigns are actually coming out of the marketing budgets of these companies versus how they're actually changing their operations. But we're keeping pushing. We know that the film has been screened all over the world, is translated into I think 30 some different languages. And there's definitely movement and a lot of exciting changes happening. I just don't know, like, the answer for sure of where we stand with the companies.
Maybe that's something we can just keep an eye out for, and, you know, hopefully do something like this again in the future, where, you know, we're recapping and then taking a look back. We do have a few minutes, so yeah, I was just gonna mention, if you want to unmute and just have, you know, in the last couple minutes, please feel free, if you just want to either raise your hand or unmute and ask a question. Any questions at all? I know we covered a lot.
Hi.
Yes, please.
Hi, this is This is June Aiken, and I'm in Maryland. I wondered if you could comment on the UN emphasis against plastic productions that was declared this year by the, I forget the acronym, for climate change. And also that I saw that the UCC, I think it is, came out with a declaration last summer against using plastics, encouraging all the congregations to avoid plastics. And I know the PCUSA is going to consider it also, that's the Presbyterian Church in the USA, in their assembly this summer.
That's great. I'm not familiar with those, but I love that there are more and more initiatives popping up and campaigns to keep this top of mind.
That is great to hear. And, I see a couple other folks have their hands up, but I don't want to hold anyone too long. If I may, Barbara, please ask your question. And Linda, would you mind typing that in the chat? And if anyone else has their hand up that I'm not calling them because I can't see, please feel free to put that in the chat.
No, I was interested in the film, and it's one of the questions that I had is how do we not use plastic? How do we not use plastic?
I think it's virtually impossible at this point to not use plastic, and I think we can do our best and be mindful of our use, but it's ultimately not, the problem's not going to be solved by us obsessing over our every single individual choice. It's going to be solved by us working collectively to change the system of production.
Thank you for reminding us about that bigger picture. And, I think some of the suggestions that Linda mentioned at her congregation, right, are some of those steps, just to make mention real quick before we close out the program. I think it would be great if congregations did do more alternatives, right? Like it's sometimes if you don't know about it and all it takes is just showing, hey, you use this every day, but you could be using this. That's such a wonderful way, Linda, to just have a quick snapshot of everyday swaps. So maybe that's something we can even help congregations with, right? Like if you're interested in doing something like that, please reach out to your regional coordinator or, Linda, I'm sure would be happy to answer a question if you had to ask. But if I may, I don't want to hold folks long. And because I see more more questions coming through the chat, and we will get to those. Thank you so much, Anna, for putting the link to the survey in. We, again, really appreciate your feedback. The only way that we can improve this program is by hearing your thoughts on topics that you'd like and what you think about this, wonderful program we've had. We're grateful for your feedback. And before we all leave, I'd like to close the program as we do every program. So this prayer is just a powerful prayer from the Buddhist faith tradition, and it is a creation care prayer. Please join me while muted. We gently caress you, the earth, our planet, and our home. Our vision has brought us closer to you, making us aware of the harm we have done to the life network upon which we ourselves depend. We are reminded that we have poisoned your waters, your lands, and your air. We have filled you with the bones of our dead from war and greed. Your pain is our pain. Touching you gently, we pray that we may become peace bringers and life bringers so that our home in its journey around the sun does not become a sterile and lonely place. And may this prayer and its power last forever. Thank you again so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Staff will stay on for a few more minutes if there's any more questions. But again, Deia, I just cannot thank you enough, for sharing with us, making this, helping us, educating us, inspiring us to action. And Linda, thanks for sharing those examples of stuff that we can all do.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for all the work you guys are doing.